Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindy Chavez here. Today is Wednesday, January the 9th, 2019. It is 8 a.m. New York time, 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, 1 p.m. in London, and in Sydney, Australia, it's midnight. But wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in. Regardless of whether you're listening to the live stream or the podcast recording, we are so glad that you are here to get your daily dose of happy, and we're going to do our very best to help supply that to you. We are continuing our discussion of our latest Neville Goddard book. Actually, the first Neville Goddard book we learned. The very first one he ever wrote, Your Faith is Your Fortune. And this is the other really, really long one, Cindy. So this one should give us at least, 2 or 3 episodes at least to do, In
my mind, I was thinking it could, be months.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I was being extremely overly optimistic when I said 2 to 3, knowing perfectly well there was no way that was going to happen.
No, but it's a good thing that we can take our time with it, I think.
Yes.
I think it might be one of the reasons why a lot of people shy away from certain authors, Neville Goddard being one of them.
Absolutely.
And that's because sometimes we're used to just flying through a book, and you can't really do that with his books, or at least I haven't had success doing that with his books. I need to take the time it takes to process it, and I think that's important. So I'm glad we're doing it this way.
Well, there's so many concept substitutions you have to do with him in order to understand even what he's talking about. Because if you try to use the regular way that we define the words that he uses, you get lost really, really quickly. You have to. That's why we call it the Neville decoder ring. You almost have to make a glossary of definitions. Okay, here's what God means. Here's what imagination means. Otherwise you get lost. You don't know what he's talking about.
Right, and sometimes I feel like we take a lot of breaks to explain that, but I also think that's important, especially for someone coming in that maybe doesn't know, the way he explains things. And in the end, I think it makes it easier. So, yeah.
I agree completely. So while we're going to be doing the exploration of Your Faith is Your Fortune, we want to encourage people who are listening to the live stream to feel free to check in with hellos and questions and comments, especially questions. We love those because it's amazing how often they tie in to whatever our subject is, but particularly with Neville. Neville's stuff is so focused, so centered on the core of what's involved in being a deliberate creator. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that the questions match up so well, but they do. They match up really, really well, So.
Right. So, please give us your comments, questions, stories, ideas. It's a lot of fun to discuss all of that with you. So. Absolutely.
So, without further ado, why don't we get into it? Unless you've got other news. I mean, we've had a lot of news lately, which has been really interesting. It's been quite the last week, because there was Dee Dee, who we helped to heal and get out of the hospital and avoid emergency surgery. There is Carlos, who is now, I don't know if you heard this, but Carlos has got so much work coming his way, which he's been requesting, that he can't even do the podcast anymore.
I know.
Holy cow.
It reminds me of one time I was doing a workshop, a creativity workshop, and I was doing it for a big corporation. I won't name them, but if you heard them, you would know it. And I was doing it. It was a 12-week course, and I was teaching their leadership group every Wednesday night. I would go to the place, and they would all come up to this room, and we would have this workshop on creativity. Mm-hmm. And, it was one of the first things where I got into a lot of conscious creation, because creation is creation, whatever you're creating, right?
This is true.
And so there was a lot of information in the workshop that dealt with kind of this stuff. I don't know if I knew about Neville yet, but still had to do with identity and choosing what you wanted your life to be. And people in the workshop started really opening up and
That's nice.
And having big shifts in their life. And at one point we joked, oh no, because several of them were like, I really don't want to work here anymore. I want to go do this and I want to do that. And I thought, they'll never hire me again because their whole staff is going to quit by the time we get done here. And actually, several of the people did. One of the people in the group sold pretty much everything he owned and he was like maybe close to 60 years old. He sold everything he owned and got an RV and went to tour the country, and it's something he'd always wanted to do. And
wow.
And so we're losing group members because of the success of the program. So when you told me about Carlos, I was like, oh, I've been through this before.
Right? Oh, yeah. Well, and plus the latest news came yesterday. Alex King, who does the Tuesday afternoon podcast with me, I don't know if you know her history and so forth, but she's great. She has a wonderful comedic talent, and she's just fun to do the shows with. But she's also on the autistic spectrum and has Asperger's and also suffers from agoraphobia. So she has all kinds of issues about going out in public. And because of all those, she's felt very limited in her ability to find a romantic relationship and was really beginning to doubt it. Ended up on a lot of apps like most single people do these days. And Carlos had recommended an app to her that she hadn't tried, so she tried that one and wasn't getting any results still, so she just kind of gave up on the whole thing. Keywords being gave up on the whole thing. Right, well, within the last week, she got a contact from a guy who lives about an hour away from her, and they have been talking every day. They've been going out together. They've been doing stuff at home, and it turns out he is also on the Asperger's autistic spectrum. I mean, just absolutely perfect.
Wow.
So,
wow.
And they didn't, that was the best part. Neither one of them indicated in their profiles that they were on the autistic spectrum. They found that out afterwards. So it was a pure LOA thing. Like, just incredible.
Wow. Alignment.
Yeah, total alignment. Absolutely.
Well, it's wonderful to hear all these success stories, and I know there's success stories among our listeners too. So,
oh yeah,
I mean we've been hearing them. So
absolutely,
yeah, so much fun.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
All right.
So that's the news of the day.
Good news. It's good news. It's nice to have some good news, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we need more of that. We need more.
All right. Well, we left off yesterday. We left off towards the end of the second chapter of Neville Goddard's "Your Faith is Your Fortune."
Right.
And the sentence that we're starting with today, I opened it up to see where I had marked it. The law of consciousness is the only law of expression. And something that I thought of when I read that, one of my very favorite astrologers, those of you that have known me for a while know that I am an astrology buff. I have an astrologer in my life that one time told me, go ahead and say you're an astrologer, because I always preface everything with, I'm not an astrologer. She said, no, you are. You need to go ahead and say it. But one of my favorite astrologers, Caroline Casey, she is an activist, and she has a list of what she calls visionary activism principles. And one of her principles, I actually wrote it on my desk blotter. It says, we only possess the power of an insight when we give it expression.
Mm.
And that's one of those things that with law of attraction is really important that we recognize, is that we can read these books and listen to podcasts, and we can take all this information in over and over and learn it all in our head.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have any power until we give it expression, until we start living it. And so I remember one time I was searching for another book because I'm a voracious reader, and I had a very keen sense that my higher self was saying to me, you don't need another book right now. You need to put into practice whatever you read in the last book, right? Do the thing.
Right.
So when I read this morning, the law of consciousness is the only law of expression. I thought that was interesting. In other words, almost anything that we learn and express, it's some way connected to the law of consciousness.
Yeah, I would say more specifically, in the context of what you're talking about here, you're not really expressing consciousness until you're expressing. That's literally what this thing is saying. If you're just in your head all the time, how conscious are you? Interesting question.
Right. I mean, and the fact that it said it's the only law of expression.
Yeah.
It's like every other law that we have, it's not that they aren't valid, they are, But this one is the one where all of those other laws get expressed.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we put them into practice, is the law of consciousness. It is who we are being.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's an important point to make. Neville says, consciousness is the way as well as the power which resurrects and expresses all that man will ever be conscious of being. Turn from the blindness of the uninitiated man who attempts to express and possess those qualities and things which he is not conscious of being and possessing, and be as the illumined mystic who decrees on the basis of this changeless law. Consciously claim yourself to be that which you seek. Appropriate the consciousness of that which you see, and you too will know the status of the true mystic as follows. I became conscious of being it. I am still conscious of being it. And I shall continue to be conscious of being it until that which I am conscious of being is perfectly expressed. Yes, I shall decree a thing, and it shall come to pass.
The line turned from
As
the
I was
blindness.
reading that, I was thinking about my friend telling me, no, go ahead and say you are an astrologer. Right?
Yeah, right.
Because see, in my consciousness, in my identity, I'm still at the place where I go, well, no, I'm studying that, but I'm not really an expert. Which is okay. It's okay, right?
Well, you're resonating with me. You're resonating with me because that's what, for a long time, I've said here on the podcast. I'm not the expert. I bring in all the other experts. I learn from them, but as many have pointed out to me, you know this stuff pretty good, Will.
Right? So Walt, you are a law of attraction expert.
Who knew?
Yeah. But that's the thing, is that at some point we can claim that and step into it and decide that, and we can do this with anything. Like I did it this year. I'll tell you what, I've always loved planners and journals, bullet journals, date books, pretty blank books. I have a shelf of them. I have so many, and I do keep journals, but often I get revved up about it at the beginning of the year, and then I don't stay with it.
Mm. Yeah.
And many of us do that, right? We get excited about certain new habits we're going to develop, and then we let go of them at some point.
Oh, sure.
And what I realize is that it's because we're not connecting those things to our identity.
Mm.
Like, there are definitely habits that I keep and that I develop and that I use consistently because those are connected somehow to my identity. So there's a difference between I'm going to go for a run and I am a runner.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we forget to step into that further place of identity, which is our consciousness.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And it makes all the difference because I think, well, the things that I do call myself, the identities that I do adopt and readily, acknowledge areas of expertise. I don't have any problem with doing the things that person would do. Right. So it's just, an interesting thing to contemplate the things that you want to accomplish, the things that you want to create. Are you that person? And if you were, what would you be doing differently than you're doing now?
It's a good point. And in fact, I was going to also mention the beginning of that second paragraph you read, turn from the blindness of the uninitiated man who attempts to express and possess qualities and things which he is not conscious of being and possessing. And when I heard you read that line, what I was thinking of was all the different people we hear about in the media, primarily, or online, which is usually the same thing these days, who very clearly are not speaking from what we would understand as being, a deliberate creator stance or a positive approach to life or whatever. There's a lot of negativity coming out of their mouths, and even the positive stuff has such a negative spin to it, it makes you wonder how positive they really are about it. So, I think about those people, and he's saying turn from that blindness. So he's basically saying, ignore them. Stop paying attention to them. Pay attention to what you already know. You already know the good stuff. Start expressing who you are. Start expressing what your knowledge is. And that's a pretty powerful concept because, first of all, it can be a little intimidating in the face of all this, I don't even know how to characterize it, but this stuff that we get all day, every single day. It can be intimidating to come out and say, well, I'm actually this enlightened being.
Consciousness.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. string of unconsciousness. Yeah, I like that. So in the face of all that, to come out and say, well, hey, I'm conscious, and I have a better connection, and here's what I understand about that. That's saying a lot. That can be kind of intimidating. But it is important because it's not like we have to announce it to the entire world, but we at least have to announce it in our own lives and announce it to people that we know and so forth. And in the process of doing that, like you said, that's where we actually become more powerful, which is good. It's a good thing.
Right? It's like that idea that, and I always say I'm going to look this up and then I forget to look it up, but there's a tribe that says, until it's in the muscle, it's just a rumor.
Oh,
it's
that's good.
It's the same idea as that, we only possess the power of an insight when we give it expression. It's that we have to use these things. And so this is how you do that with consciousness, is that you go ahead and appropriate the consciousness of that person you want to be. You claim it. You say, this is who I am. And we can do it at any time. And then we begin to do the things that person would do.
Yes. We assume the identity.
Yep. Yeah. And that's Neville, right? Well, we are ready to move on to chapter 3.
All right. Well, let's do it. Yeah.
Right? Chapter 3 is called The Principle of Truth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Every time I hear that, and I think about, I think it was Gloria Steinem that said, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free, but first it will piss you off. I think, there's actually a lot of truth in that statement, right? Because I know how many people, even with law of attraction, found out about the law of attraction and conscious creating and then thought, oh my goodness, you mean I've been doing this to myself this whole time? I created all this? And I think, there we go. So,
or even on a more fundamental level, another way that you get pissed off with law of attraction is realizing you can't just put it out there. You got to let the stuff in. And that actually takes some attention and some work to do that. That'll kind of piss you off too. Like, well, wait a minute, why does it have to be so difficult?
The receiving muscles.
Oh, my goodness. Oh.
Right. We have to be willing to allow it. That seems like it'd be the easiest part, but it's really not for most of us, right? Yeah. It's like, why do I keep resisting the good stuff?
And Abraham Hicks recognizes that. They've often talked about how people struggle the most with the receiving part. That is the most difficult step. And in many ways it is, because we're trained not to accept. We're trained not to receive.
Yeah, it's true. We were talking about how we can get used to being better receivers in such every single day, receiving a compliment or receiving. I was yesterday at lunch with somebody, a dear friend of mine, and I went to put some money in, and it was so funny because she knows this stuff. So she's not going to be the person that says, "Oh no, don't," I'll pay for it. But it was funny because I just went to put some money in, and she said, "Are you sure?"
That's good.
I was like, "Okay." I said, and she said, "Okay." And it was so funny. It was like I was watching this resistance try to happen, but she was also trying to not resist. And I love that so much.
Hey, Siraj actually has a question for us. Actually, it's for you. I think it's more specifically for you. He says, I have one question. Whether we believe in the law of attraction or astrology, or are they both the same? That's the extent of his question.
No, they're definitely not both the same. Mm-hmm. I believe that there are people that believe that practice them both or study them both or are interested in both of them. Those interest groups probably overlap, but definitely two different things. I have a practice of learning about what's going on with the planets and the stars and allowing that to inform some of my law of attraction practice, but you definitely don't have to know anything about that to practice law of attraction consciously. And of course, we know that everyone is practicing the law of attraction unconsciously, if not consciously. I mean, it's a law. So these things, it's like saying, do you practice gravity, right? So,
that's right.
I mean, it's going to affect us one way or the other. But when we can recognize how it works, then just like gravity, then we can use it to our advantage and do all kinds of fun things with that property. So
it's kind of like
that would be my answer there. No, not the same thing.
I like the idea of practicing gravity. I think it's funny because I think about things like, well, I'm going to practice keeping my feet on the ground today.
Right.
You just don't do that. I'm going to practice seeing if I drop an apple, will it fall to the ground? That's what I'm going to practice today.
Right. It's like a physics class beginning. Okay. So I hope that answers your question. No, two different things.
Oh, well, he actually added to the question. He says, what about tarot card reading?
Well, that as well is not the same thing. There are a lot of people that practice one and not the other. I practice both. I like to use tarot as a personal growth tool because I think that the archetypal images involved, they tap something in us when we see them. And we can only ever express what's going on within ourself, and we tap into our own experience and our own, inner knowledge and wisdom. So we can use anything as an oracle. It doesn't have to be a tarot card, but those things bring us to a place of contemplation where we can tap into our creative side and allow ourselves to receive messages that maybe we wouldn't take the time to figure out otherwise. So those are both practices that I enjoy, but they're definitely not necessary for law of attraction at all.
I agree with you. In fact, Suraj, to give you the contrasting viewpoint, I don't really do any of those things myself. I know many of my co-hosts do stuff like that. Linda's particularly involved with angel cards and so forth, which I'd never even heard of before I did the podcast with her, to be perfectly honest. But, a lot of people are into that kind of stuff. I'm just not. I never have been. My sister tried to interest me in astrology many years ago. To be perfectly honest, I rolled my eyes. It just did not connect with me at all. But what I have since learned is what you just said, Cindy, that people use it in order to connect internally. And that really is the key. If you find a practice like that helps you connect internally, why not? Go for it. Because anything that we can do to improve that communication is bound to be helpful to us. I'm just a little bit more direct about it than other people are, perhaps, in the sense of I just want to go directly to, okay, inner Walt, what are you thinking today? But, whatever it takes to get there, you do whatever it takes to get there. That's what it comes down to.
Right, and these things that we're talking about, oracles and such, they just all work on the principle of synchronicity. It's just the same way we notice any synchronicity, right? I mean, which we notice all the time, because synchronicities are happening all the time. It's just that we're not always aware of them because we're not synced up to whatever that vibration is. But there's an alignment there. It's all about alignment. And so that's the property that these things work on. And it gets our attention, and I think it's fun and delightful, and, it's something I enjoy. That's why I do it. Not because it is mandatory, not because it is, necessary for law of attraction. There's only a connection if you practice both things.
In fact, with these things, with all of them, including law of attraction, I'm always mindful of what Joel told me one time. He told me a story about a friend of his who I think is a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist or something like that, who's extremely, extremely skeptical about all this stuff. And one day he decided he was going to try to argue Joel out of paying attention to all this nonsense, law of attraction and deliberate creator and all that kind of stuff. And after this, going back and forth, and it got kind of heated after a while, his friend said to him, well, Joel, I mean, what you have to understand is these things, they're just in your mind. And Joel says, well, it may be in my mind, but, I found that they actually work in my life. And it's worked in the lives of my clients and so forth. So it really is, valuable stuff. And his friend said, yeah, but you don't seem to understand. The only reason this stuff works is because you believe it does. And Joel said, exactly.
I love it. It's so true.
So
Exactly.
if tarot works for you, then it works for you because you believe it does. If astrology works for you, it works for you because you believe it does. If numerology works for you, it works for you because you believe it does. If you are a deliberate creator because you believe you're a deliberate creator, then you are.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. If you have no interest in it, then, follow your curiosity and find what interests you.
Yeah.
And then that thing, whatever it is, could be music or sports or art or whatever it is that you're gardening, I don't know, that thing will begin to work in synchronicity with your law of attraction practice.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Because that's how we're made. So, yeah, it was a great question.
It is a good question. Really good question. So.
All right, so let's see what Neville has to say in chapter 3.
Yep.
Neville says, the truth that sets man free is the knowledge that his consciousness is the resurrection and the life, that his consciousness both resurrects and makes alive all that he is conscious of being.
I gotta give him credit, by the way. This is one of the few times where he actually includes his definition in the same sentence where he hit you with a phrase that you thought meant something else. That's good.
Right? Right. Maybe this is like Neville 101.
Yeah, right.
Apart from consciousness, there is neither resurrection nor life. When man gives up his belief in a God apart from himself and begins to recognize his awareness of being to be God, as did Jesus and the prophets, he will transform his world with the realization, I and my Father are one, but my Father is greater than I. He will know that his consciousness is God, and that which he is conscious of being is the Son, bearing witness of God the Father. The conceiver and the conception are one, but the conceiver is greater than his conception. Before Abraham was, I am. And of course, Neville's speaking of the biblical Abraham, not Abraham Hicks.
Right. Abraham Hicks comes after Neville, not before.
Yes, I was aware of being before I became aware of being man, and in that day, when I shall cease to be conscious of being man, I shall still be conscious of being. The consciousness of being is not dependent upon being anything. Now that's a really interesting statement, right?
It is, yeah.
We read something like that yesterday about formlessness. And somebody was asking yesterday on the podcast about ideas such as the soul and the spirit. And we were talking about the idea that consciousness is. It's not dependent upon being a specific thing. It's formless. It just is. But that it is the power and the energy that creates everything.
Mm-hmm.
Neville goes on to say, it preceded all conceptions of itself and shall be when all conceptions of itself shall cease to be.
And I want to point something else out about consciousness, too, because we learned at the end of the last chapter that in addition to what you just said, consciousness is also dependent on its own expression. So
yes.
we have to keep that part in mind as we're thinking about what he's saying here, that the consciousness of being is not dependent upon being anything. That he specifically just a moment ago reminded us that it is directly tied into expression.
Exactly. And that comes back to what he says here. I am the beginning and the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to express itself.
Right.
Because it is. Right?
Yes.
He says that is all things or conceptions of myself begin and end in me, but I, the formless awareness, remain forever. We were talking about the idea that our body isn't going to last forever, but our consciousness is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds like what he's speaking about here when he says all things are conceptions of myself begin and end in me, but I, the formless awareness, remain forever.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus discovered this glorious truth and declared himself to be one with God, not the God that man had fashioned, for he never recognized such a God. Jesus found God to be his awareness of being, and so told man that the kingdom of God and heaven were within. When
That's
it's recorded,
that's an interesting phrase, by the way. Jesus found God to be his awareness of being. Interesting phrase. Awareness of being. It's another. It's an equivalence, I guess, to consciousness, although it also includes the expression component. But awareness of being. Most people don't necessarily think about connecting to or contacting or understanding God as awareness of being. That's another Neville concept, I think, that kind of goes a little bit beyond what traditional religion teaches.
Right, and Neville says that Jesus found God to be his awareness of being, and so told man that the kingdom of God and heaven were within.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah.
And I think about everything we learned in Law of Attraction. I mean, this is exactly, we might not have heard it this way before, but it is exactly what we're learning. We're learning that we are the creator, that we have the power to create our own life experience.
Exactly,
right?
Yes. Yeah, that's the hardest part, but that is the big part that all this leads up to. Because what better way is there to express than to be a creator?
Neville says when it is recorded that Jesus left the world and went to his Father, he was received up into heaven, it is simply stating that he turned his attention from the world of the senses and rose in consciousness to that level which he desired to express. There he remained until he became one with the consciousness to which he ascended. When he returned to the world of man, he could act with the positive assurance of that which he was conscious of being, a state of consciousness no one but himself felt or knew that he possessed. Man who is ignorant of this everlasting law of expression looks upon such happenings as miracles.
Yeah.
So again, Neville does not take these verses literally, but he explains them in a way that's metaphorically, metaphysical, very nebulous and esoteric.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right?
But they're all expressions. That's the part that I'm loving here. They're all expressions. That's my big takeaway for the day. They're all expressions. To rise in consciousness to the level of the thing desired, and to remain there until such level becomes your nature, is the way of all seeming miracles. And if I be lifted up, I shall draw all men unto me. If I be lifted up in consciousness to the naturalness of the thing desired, I shall draw the manifestation of that desire to me. No man comes unto me, save the Father within me draws him. My consciousness is the Father who draws the manifestation of life to me. The nature of the manifestation is determined by the state of consciousness in which I dwell. I am always drawing into my world that which I am conscious of being. I need to ask you something. I don't know if maybe you just inadvertently skipped a piece or if it's not in what you're reading there, but the quote includes a second part in my text here that says, and I and my Father are one. Is that something you just overlooked, or is that something that's not in what you're reading? I overlooked it. I apologize. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, there were brackets, so I wasn't certain. No man comes unto me, save the Father within me draws him, and I and my Father are one. But that's a pretty important concept, that I and my Father are one, that we and God are one, that we're all one and the same in a sense. Right, and not just that, but that the idea of consciousness here, because the next sentence, he says, my consciousness is the Father who draws the manifestation of life to me. Right, yes. And so there's no conscious creating if we don't recognize this, according to Neville. I agree with him. Yeah. I mean, how could you do it otherwise? He says, if you're dissatisfied with your present expression of life, then you must be born again. Rebirth is the dropping of that level with which you are dissatisfied and rising to that level of consciousness which you desire to express and possess. Boy, is that completely different from what the churches teach. Oh my goodness. Right? Wow. Right, but I think it's spot on. I think so too, yeah. He says you cannot, and I love this next part, you cannot serve two masters or opposing states of consciousness at the same time. And that is that whole idea, of we either are a thing or we're not. Mm-hmm. and when we get into a kind of wishy-washy place where we're not willing to commit to either,
then there's not a lot of power.
Yes.
Because, why? Because at that point we're double-minded.
Well, that's an interesting point, because without commitment, you really can't believe. I mean, you said it yourself. You have to commit to it. Well, yeah. Right. How else could you believe anything?
I think of the times that we may feel like, well, I kind of want this, but I kind of don't.
Yes.
That's not a real powerful position.
No, it's not.
And I understand we all go through that at times. That's how we get clarity. We keep searching and we keep trying to figure out what is it that I do want. Do I want to make this choice or that choice?
Right.
But until we do make the choice, then we're in this place where we've got an opposing state of consciousness. And we can't commit to either one.
Mm-hmm.
And until we can commit, we're not going to have the power of expression.
Yep.
Neville says, taking your attention from one state and placing it upon the other, you die to the one from which you've taken it, and you live and express the one which you are united. And that, to me, that's just a picture of commitment.
It is.
It's when I say that, okay, I used the example before, and I'm not a runner and I don't run, so it's funny that I used that example, right? But if I'm going to do any kind of physical exercise, it's usually going to be yoga or Tai Chi or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about it now because where I live, even though it's the beginning of the year, it's been in the 70s. So this past weekend, there were runners out everywhere. So many more runners than we ever see, right? It's like the first week of January and everyone is out running.
Right, right.
And so if I decide what a runner does, and we're all going to have our own little scenario about that, right? But if, to me, a real runner, someone who's a committed runner, if they go to bed early so they can get good sleep and they get up early and maybe they eat particular healthy foods and they buy clothes that they can wear when they're out running, there's that I amness to that. I am a runner.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the person that's not a runner and doesn't claim to be a runner, but decides they want to run.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in that place of, well, I'm not really a runner. That's why I just run in these regular clothes and I don't have good running shoes. And this is why, well, a lot of times I stay up way too late and then I can't wake up early and get out there. Because it's not part of who they consider themselves to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like amazing what happens when we shift into that place and we decide I am whatever. I am a runner, I'm a writer, I'm a painter, I'm a podcaster, whatever it is. I'm an expert, I do this. This is who I am. I'm stepping into that consciousness. Miracles start happening.
That's true. Yeah, they do.
And that's what happens when we take our attention from one state and place it on the other and we make this choice. No, I really want to be this. It's different than I really want to do this.
That's an interesting
point. The doing
just
happens.
Yeah.
The doing happens because of who you're being.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. The doing follows the being rather than the other way around.
So Neville says, man cannot see how it would be possible to express that which he desires to be by so simple a law as acquiring the consciousness of the thing desired. The reason for this lack of faith on the part of man is that he looks at the desired state through the consciousness of his present limitations. Therefore, he naturally sees it as impossible of accomplishment. One of the first things man must realize is that it is impossible in dealing with this spiritual law of consciousness to put new wine into old bottles or new patches on old garments. That is, you cannot take any part of the present consciousness into the new state. For the state sought is complete in itself and needs no patching. Every level of consciousness automatically expresses itself. To rise to the level of any state is to automatically become that state in expression. But in order to rise to the level that you are not now expressing, you must completely drop the consciousness with which you are now identified.
I need to interrupt you. I want to go back to the end of that previous paragraph. Every level of consciousness automatically expresses itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about the fact that he's previously, in the last chapter, he made the point that it isn't consciousness until there's expression going on. But now he's saying consciousness automatically expresses itself. I'm thinking, well, that's an interesting thing to say. So,
well, what I think's interesting is that he says every level of consciousness.
Every level, yeah.
Right. When I talk about levels of consciousness, I'm talking about energy levels. And he may not be, but it still correlates. So, in other words, if I am experiencing victim energy, if that's my level of consciousness, is that life sucks, things are hard, nothing ever goes right for me, those things will be automatically expressed through me because that's the level of consciousness that I'm at.
Well, I think you just touched on the point that I'm seeing here, which is that any level of consciousness has an energetic vibration to it. It has a flow to it. In Abraham's terms, it has the energy, it has the vibration. And in that vibration is expression. So literally feeling even the lowest of energy, the depression area of the Abraham Hicks scale, even in that area, you're putting off a vibration. So you are expressing consciousness in that area.
Yes. It's going to be expressed.
Right.
One way or the other. That level, it's going to automatically express itself.
Yep.
And I love that Neville says, to rise to the level of any state is to automatically become that state in expression. But in order to rise to the level that you're now not expressing, you must completely drop the consciousness with which you are now identified. Until your present consciousness is dropped, you will not be able to rise to another level.
Which is another way of saying you can't be both depressed and happy at the same time. You may think that you can be, but you really can't be. You're either one or the other.
Here's what I think is interesting is that so many times, and we can talk about it in an emotional kind of way with the idea of depression, right? People think, well, I will be happy when this depression isn't there. Mm-hmm. But we say that about a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'll feel better when X, Y, Z.
Exactly.
Right? I'll be happy when this happens. And Neville's saying it's the other way around. Is that until your present consciousness is dropped, you won't be able to rise to another level.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with the phrase, I want to feel happy, or I'm trying to feel happy, or I'm looking to feel happy, or I'm getting to feel happy. They're all basically saying the same thing. I'm not happy. And so I'm really not in that level of consciousness at all. That's kind of a clue built in there.
Right. And so what level of consciousness are you at? And that's the level that we drop.
Yes.
and when we're in those lower levels, those levels of energy, those levels of consciousness are very, very weighty and heavy. We even use that as a term. We say, I feel heavy. There's such a heaviness, right?
Mm-hmm. True.
We identify sadness and depression and emotions such as that as being heavy. And they are.
So this brings a question to my mind. Heavy. The question that comes to my mind is, okay, well, we know that these things are heavy. We know that these things are things that we need to drop. Why do we have so much trouble dropping them?
That's a good question.
I mean, I think part of it is, it's kind of when we say, I am having trouble dropping something, we are on some level admitting I'm not willing to drop it.
Right.
Which is a little scary.
And admitting that part of us wants to hang on to it.
Yeah.
Because very often, whatever level of consciousness we're at, I mean, in some way it is serving us.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why I'm so much always in favor of not being so judgy about it. Like, just knowing that it is and not being so judgmental. It's easier to drop that way. So I want to go forward because Neville says, do not be dismayed. And I think this is important.
Okay.
Because we're getting to, we can get to this place where we're like, I'm having trouble dropping this. I'm having trouble stepping into a new identity. I'm having trouble rising to another level of consciousness. How do I do it? And Neville says, do not be dismayed. The letting go of your present identity is not as difficult as it might appear to be. So I think that's a hopeful statement on Neville's part.
Very, right? Yes.
The invitation of the scriptures to be absent from the body and be present with the Lord is not given to a select few. It is a sweeping call to all mankind. Now, remember here that Neville's going to start describing some things with his own definitions that are much different than the way we may have learned these verses.
Right.
Because to be absent from the body and be present with the Lord is something you hear at funerals all the time.
Yep.
When the minister is speaking of death and saying that even though your consciousness is no longer in your body, that means you're present with God. Neville is not saying that. Neville says the body from which you are invited to escape is your present conception of yourself with all its limitations, while the Lord with whom you are to be present is your awareness of being. So these are one of those concepts that may take a minute to sink in because we're so used to hearing this a certain way.
Well,
Neville says to
we're certainly stimulating thoughts in the minds of our listeners who are listening to the live stream because we're actually generating some questions. Sarah is asking, why is it so hard? Is it the ego mind still holding on? What do you think about that?
I think that part of it is that, number one, we don't believe it's possible. It might seem too easy and in that become difficult. But I also think that it's not always ego. Some of it is physical. It's that memory in the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It's the story we've been telling for so long. And, one of my examples of it this morning is even interesting to me is that I had an astrologer who is an astrologer and makes her living that way, teaching and doing astrology, said to me, no, you are an astrologer. You should just say it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Why is that so hard for me to say that? When I say, well, no, I'm just, it's a hobby.
It's a hobby, right?
When actually, no, I actually have built part of my business around astrology. And it's so funny to me.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, to say, okay, why can't I just drop that story? And I can drop that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's true.
Why is that so hard? Well, part of it's muscle memory. It's because every time I open my mouth, I say, well, I'm not really this or that.
And then Suraj has a question also. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you done?
Well, just to say, we tell these stories all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
The two I always use as examples, and they're not my stories, but you do hear them all the time, so if they resonate with people, is people say, oh, I never remember names.
And there's also another side to telling that story all the time, and that is some of us learn that it's not smart for us to do that from a deliberate creator stance, so we just tell it to ourselves in our own mind, like that doesn't make a difference, right?
Right. Exactly. No, that's a good point. And I actually think that saying these stories out loud, they are the expression of consciousness. Mm-hmm. But the consciousness is there whether we're saying it in our mind or saying it out loud.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so our stories have so much power, and especially the stories that we tell all the time that begin with I am. Mm-hmm. Right? I am terrible at remembering names. I am not good at math. All these kind of stories that we hear ourselves and other people say.
Exactly.
And we say them and say them and say them, and it's like our subconscious, who is the creator, says, okay, oh, all right. It just takes the order. It's okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
I can do that. I can make you not good at remembering names.
and I actually woke up this morning realizing that I was doing exactly this. And doing it far more often than I really want to. And recognizing, you know what, I need to make a few shifts here in the way I'm living my life, throughout the day. The things I'm focusing on, things I'm talking about, things I'm thinking about in my own mind that I'm not even telling somebody else about. I gotta shift that around because that's not serving me. It's not taking me in the direction I want to go. So I think it's a good recognition to have. And then Suraj also has a question. He says, to let it go if we are tracked... Oh, wait a minute. I think I cut out part of the question. Let me go back to the original here. He says, how do we let it go if we are attracted to that thought or person or situation? Why is it so hard? Is it the ego mind still... Oh, that was... Why it's so hard? That was Sarah. Suraj was just asking, how do we let it go if we are too attracted to that thought or person or situation?
Well, I think that what we're going to read next from Neville is the actual how-to.
Okay.
It's the instruction. his first instruction. He says, to accomplish this seemingly impossible feat, you take your attention away from your problem and place it upon just being. You say silently but feelingly, I am. Do not condition this awareness, but continue declaring quietly, I am. I am.
Interesting point. Do not condition this awareness. In other words, don't say I am because of this or right. I appreciate myself because of that. Just declare I am and leave it at that. That's an interesting point.
Yep. And he says and he says to repeat it, right? So
right.
It's like a mantra.
Yeah.
I am. And he says to say it silently but feelingly. He says simply feel that you are faceless and formless and continue doing so until you feel yourself floating.
So get into a meditative state.
Mm-hmm. Floating is a psychological state which completely denies the physical. Through practice in relaxation and willfully refusing to react to sensory impressions, it is possible to develop a state of consciousness of pure receptivity. It is a surprisingly easy accomplishment. In this state of complete detachment, a definite singleness of purposeful thought can be indelibly engraved upon your unmodified consciousness. This state of consciousness is necessary for true meditation. This wonderful experience of rising and floating is the signal that you are absent from the body or problem and are now present with the Lord. In this expanded state, you are not conscious of being anything but I am. I am. You are only conscious of being.
That's the first time I've ever heard anyone express I am, solely I am, as being the ultimate goal or destination of a meditative practice. Just getting to the point of just saying I am and just feeling I am. I mean, it makes sense, don't get me wrong. It's just, I don't think I've ever heard it expressed that way.
Really?
No.
Okay, that's interesting to me because I've heard it a lot. Just the idea of repeating I am as a mantra. In Hindu meditation, there's a mantra, so hum. And the way it's done, so on the in-breath, hum on the out-breath. And you're just repeating so hum over and over. And you know what so hum means in Sanskrit? Means
I'm guessing.
I am. Right. So it's a pretty common meditation there too. Let's see. I lost my place for a second.
I think I often wondered that about some of these meditation mantras, because all the mantras that I ever heard about, initially anyway, were all from Hindu or another language that I didn't know. And so I would think to myself, well, what's the point of uttering a mantra if I don't even understand what it means? If I'm going to pick a mantra, why not pick something I understand? But I don't think I'd ever heard anyone express in English, I am as a mantra. I'm fascinated that you have.
It makes me wonder if Neville knew this. I mean, I don't know. But that is where that mantra comes from, so hum. It means I am. It means I am one with the universe. I am being.
Well, we know that his teacher was named Abdullah, so, I mean, it's possible somebody named Abdullah would know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Neville goes on to say, when this expansion of consciousness is attained within this formless deep of yourself, give form to the new conception by claiming and feeling yourself to be that which you, before you entered into this state, desired to be. You will find that within this formless deep of yourself, all things appear to be divinely possible. Anything that you sincerely feel yourself to be while in this expanded state becomes, in time, your natural expression. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Yes, let there be a firmness or conviction in the midst of this expanded consciousness by knowing and feeling, I am that, the thing desired. As you claim and feel yourself to be the thing desired, you are crystallizing this formless liquid light that you are into the image and likeness of that which you are conscious of being. Now, I know that we've read before that Neville's used the phrase hardening into fact.
Mm-hmm.
And here he says, we're crystallizing this formless liquid light that we are into the image and likeness of that which we're conscious of being.
Yeah, clearly the same thought.
Kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Now that the law of your being has been revealed to you, begin this day to change your world by revaluing yourself. Too long has man held to the belief that he is born of sorrow and must work out his salvation by the sweat of his brow. God is impersonal and no respecter of persons. So long as man continues to walk in this belief of sorrow, so long will he walk in a world of sorrow and confusion, for the world in its every detail is man's consciousness crystallized.
Okay, we gotta go back. That sentence, God is impersonal and no respecter of persons. So this clearly requires the Neville decoder ring.
Okay, so what he is saying is that this isn't just, and we talked about this last week, all of this power, all of this creative ability, it's not just for some chosen few. It's in all of us. It's not just for some of us. It's available to everyone.
So that's what he means by impersonal and no respecter of persons.
Right, and this is interesting too, is that, we've talked about this before. We get to choose how we use it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether we're conscious of it or not, it's still a law.
Mm-hmm.
And Neville says, so long as man continues to walk in this belief of sorrow, so long will he walk in a world of sorrow and confusion. For the world in its every detail is man's consciousness crystallized.
So when he says God is impersonal and no respecter of persons, he's basically saying that it applies to everyone, which makes this, in my mind, a really strange phrasing. Because if it applies to everyone, why would you say it's no respecter of persons? That's the way I would look at it. It's like, well, it's a respecter of all persons, isn't it? But that's not the way he chooses to express it. He expresses it as, no, God is impersonal and no respecter of persons. It's almost like he's saying, don't pay attention to certain persons who claim some sort of jurisdiction over you or something like that.
Well, it's not saying that there's no respect. It's saying that there's no kind of worldly respect, right? Like we have respect on different levels for different people because they have degrees or titles.
Credentials.
And Neville's making the point that it isn't so with this. Just because you have a title or you're the ruler of a country or you have a large bank account, it doesn't mean that this works better for you. It works for everyone.
Sarah just posted an interesting comment along those lines. She says, I think it is available to everyone who believes. As some friends I've tried to talk to, they laugh at me and say, I'm a crazy nutter, as they don't believe.
Right, but they could.
They could, sure.
Right, and if they were to decide to believe, to choose to believe, they would have the same power available to them as you do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true.
And yet, if they continue to have a belief of, that life is hard, right, and that they're having to work it all out by the sweat of their brow, then that's what they'll experience.
That's true.
And that's the point that Neville is making.
Well, we've run out of time to continue with the chapter for this hour, but fortunately we get to do another hour this afternoon, you and I. I like Wednesdays because we get to do 2 hours in one day. So we'll just pick up this one and we'll do the next one as well, the Humsiki chapter. That's an interesting title all by itself. So that's our task for, 7 hours from now. So I want to, first of all, thank you, Cindy. This has been great. I love your insights on this stuff. It really helps me a lot. I'm sure it helps our listeners too. And I look forward to talking to you again later this afternoon.
I will be back.
And we want to invite our listeners as well to come back next time because you're a key reason why we do this. And that's why we want you back every time here we do, when we do your Daily Dose of Happy here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.